Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Jim Havland from the Mobile Thought Leaders for another MTL online event today, talking about everything as a service, or just about everything as a service, as we look at what our industry is going to look like and what supporting IT initiatives, especially mobility, is going to look like as we have more and more stuff as a service to play with. We've got a great panel today and some good stories to talk about from our Mobile Thought Leaders universe. For those of you who are new to Mobile Thought Leaders, I will tell you that Mobile Thought Leaders is a membership-based organization. The cost of membership in Mobile Thought Leaders is participation. So congratulations, you are now Mobile Thought Leaders. Today's event is being recorded, so we will invite you to share it with your friends, family, and anyone you meet on the street over the next couple of weeks. And with no further ado, let's get directly into our content for the day. Mobile Thought Leaders is a global group. We meet live in cities all over the world. Recently, just Cork, Ireland, I think is the most recent one, a couple weeks ago. And we're now planning one for Houston coming up here in the United States. So come see us live as well. And we'll be kicking off a research project next month about digital transformation. So you'll want to look for that as well. Lots of places to go kind of meet up with us. And if you're looking to find other people who are facing similar projects in their world, our member concierge introduction is a great way. Through the mobilethoughtleaders.com website, you can ask to meet people that are doing the same kind of things that you're doing, who have already done it. You can learn from them. Experience sharing is the key to Mobile Thought Leaders, and gosh, it's a great way to learn from your colleagues in a pretty fantastic way. I can also I'll pitch you on the research review that's out right now, and people are loving this paper. It is huge, it's weighty, but it's got lots of great pictures in it and some very important trends. We've done a couple of events around this work as well. So look for mobilethoughtleaders.com for the webinars and other papers to download from this. We're working on some derivative papers now that I think will make it a little bit easier to digest, because like I said, it's 18 pages. You might not get to the whole thing, but there's definitely things in there to help you make decisions, but also convince people in your organization of how to move forward. So let's move on to our panelists today. First of all, from joining us today from Bob, are you laughing at Chet's picture?
I'm laughing at my own picture.
Oh, Chet. Okay, good. All right, Bob. First, Bob Burkhardt. Bob has been a good friend and colleague for a long time, a member of Mobile Thought Leaders in good standing for umpteen years, and the guy with the best job in the nation, working for a large insurance company out of Columbus, Ohio. Bob, welcome to the panel today.
Thanks. Looking forward to everything. Should be a great conversation.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Bob. And then we have Jad Nordby coming off your star turn in some recent films. I think people probably recognize you right away. You're coming to us from Austin, Texas today?
That is correct.
All right, very good. And that is the southern headquarters for Vox Mobile, I understand. Is that right?
It is. I think the only resemblance that's correct in that picture is the fact that I have glasses.
You do have glasses. And occasionally you can look a little yellow, but that's just my thing. So guys, thanks so much for joining. And obviously, as I'll tell everyone else as well, it's all about experience sharing. So I'll be asking you to kind of pipe in with your stories and experiences as we go through some of the content today. So we're going to be talking about what we've learned about outsourcing. So going from the earliest days of outsourcing to everything as a service, let's kind of make sure we understand what really makes for good as a service type procurement. And there are definitely things that are better to keep in-house. And I know you all have some stories on that. And we'll talk a bit about Nationwide, because I think, Bob, you guys have done some amazing work at kind of advancing your approach into digital transformation and taking advantage of these more advanced thoughts that we've had at Mobile Thought Leaders for a long time. And we'll cover off of what we've learned from Mobile Thought Leaders for what makes for a great place to apply the as-a-service model inside your organizations, what to go buy as a service. And then, we get this question a lot. Bob, I guess you probably don't worry about it too much. People ask all the time, well, what am I going to do once we stop doing this internally? And sometimes it's kind of just a sad in the middle of the night question, but do you ever worry about that? Like, is Bob Burkhardt going to be replaced by robots at some point?
No, never worry about that, and I think we'll cover that in a lot of discussion, right? There's always something to do. It just your work changes, right?
Well, I think that's it, and I think it's sometimes hard to see what's coming next. So we've got great news because what's coming next is actually a lot more fun than what we've been doing. All right, so let's talk about outsourcing here. So from a historical perspective, and this goes back to my early days, and I think I outdate you both significantly. It was really started with maintenance contracts, this idea that when you bought something, it came with a certain amount of external work to help with this. Because way back in the day, if you bought something, you owned it and you had to get your own everything. There was no way to get it. There was no official services. But let's I hear from everybody on this. So outsource services, I think all of us have found it's been part of the story of trying to figure out what to outsource and how to outsource it. Your mess for less, Chad, I think is something that you and I have probably heard throughout our careers. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think with your global experience, I'm sure part of it's always been labor arbitrage more than really trying to make anything better.
Yeah, I think labor arbitrage was where it initially started, and then it really started to shift into what are these activities actually core to what we do, and which ones are just chewing up headcount.
Right. Well, and I think that's it. So, and as we talked about managed services, has Nationwide gone through these steps? I'm sorry, this large insurance company in Columbus. Bob, have you gone through these steps? I mean, I imagine you guys have been around for a long time, so I'm sure you've gone through all these steps of the maturing model of what it looks like to outsource.
Oh, sure. I mean, just like pretty much everyone else in Columbus, we've went through these steps. You're right. Nationwide's been around for 93 years. So coming up 2026 will be our 100-year anniversary. But I mean, we've went through these, and we've had some great success, and we've had some bumps in the road, along the way. Because you never know how it's going to go until you start to do it, and it takes a lot of planning and a lot of time and effort to make one of these happen, and to make them successful, it requires a great partnership with whoever is managing the service, right? No matter what type, if it's outsourced or managed service or anything as a service.
Well, I think what we've seen too, I mean, with this is that unfortunately, when people do try things and when it doesn't go well, they'll the pendulum will swing back the other direction, and we've seen this with CIOs changing out in companies. It'll go from we're going to outsource everything to we're going to insource everything model, back and forth, as if one or the other is the right answer, as opposed to just getting better at figuring out, as Chad was saying, where should our focus be, and what are we going to be really good at, and therefore the other stuff is something we have to find a new model for. Have you experienced that, Bob, in your career? Is it kind of that flip flopping on in and out?
Absolutely. I mean, the pendulum has definitely swung a couple ways, and it is dependent on it's dependent on a lot of things, right? It's dependent on the economy. It's dependent on the executives that you have. It's dependent on the relationships that the executives have.
Right.
So it definitely swings back and forth. And right now it's kind of, our thought is just like most people is, we got to get to the cloud. We got to get to the cloud to be more agile, to be able to take advantage of the speed and agility that someone who really does this all the time can give us, right? And maybe we want to choose one solution that's in the cloud today, and tomorrow we might want to choose a different one. We're no longer married to solutions forever. We can date solutions.
Well, I think that's certainly been our advice I know Chad Vox's consulting organization has been saying for a while that you've really got to build it to change, because you don't want to be locked in. I mean, the idea isn't to choose; it's the idea is to choose for now and to be good at at making those transitions over time. But that's a hard story to tell sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, it sure is. Yeah, it's a different mindset, right? It's a totally different mindset, and you have to help others in the organization see the value of that. You know, one of the things that I usually talk to people when we look at something like this is, you know, how things may change. Where, you know, if you look at just like engineering and operations, you know, most of them think, wait a second, if we don't have this, if this isn't ours, what am I going to do? Where's this stuff going? And you have to shift what, you know, their thought pattern to, now you're orchestrating it, right? Someone else is taking care of the day-to-day functions of making sure it's working, and you're going to get to do the higher value stuff now. So, you know, that's how you have to talk to engineering and operations to get them excited about what's next. You know, they're going to be the architects of it. You know, they're going to get to lead things instead of just focusing on updates and everything else that they would normally have to do in their day-to-day position when we own something in-house.
You know, and Chad, I know, you know, Gartner's been talking about this mode 2 versus mode 1 approach for a couple of years now, and certainly the biggest, you know, to what Bob is saying, it's cultural. This notion that I've gotten so good at my mode 1 stuff, I know exactly what to do. Like, oh, we're going to spin up a new server. I'm going to put these kind of patches on it. And I know exactly how to do that, as opposed to learning this new, I'm going to start figuring stuff out every day approach to life. Does when you talk to customers, Chad, are they feeling it? Are they feeling like they need to get to mode 2 and therefore they need to find a new way to get mode 1 done?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing across multiple industries where this consumer perception that's been around for a while, which has been there's an app for everything, they're starting to digest and understand that there's literally an application or a solution for every component of their business. And when they start embracing that, the rate of change and the management of those programs is so fast and aggressive, both from a competitive perspective, but just in the changing landscape, they just can't keep in that original mode of build, execute, tweak. Otherwise, entire markets are passing them by.
Yeah. Well, you know, and so I put up this chart here from Deloitte, and I don't expect anybody to digest it while we're talking here, but you can. This is available for download along with the webcast. But the notion here that we have to really make this work is it has to come from the top down and from the bottom up. It's like, so you need these projects going on in the organization that kind of challenge the traditional infrastructure approach, along with the top down saying we're going to start reforming the infrastructure, and together we're going to start finding that new middle ground and figuring out that next way of being. And that is the new mode of the organization. That is mode 2, is figuring out is what we do. We don't turn the crank every day. We figure out the crank turning. That's got to happen somewhere else. So let's cover off on some of these problems that we've had with some of these. You know, maintenance contracts is pretty simple. They're very limited scope, limited SLAs, and there were lots of vendors to manage because every piece of equipment had its own maintenance contract. Outsource services, languages, time zones, and really finding expertise in those models was hard to come by. But I know, Chad, I still, when I talk to people, sometimes I think about outsourcing of any sort as having this low expertise model. Do you still face that as well?
Yeah, we do. I mean, organizations that have gone down this path have, you know, started to rapidly find that once it starts to become low expertise, you can only roll back prices for so long or so far until your cost of trying to manage that low expertise start to offset the cost rollbacks.
Yeah, I guess, you know, I'd actually say I'd say this, Bob. I don't find too many places where I'd say traditional outsourcing, which was really, I'm going to take what you do, but I'm going to do it with some labor arbitrage for less somewhere or some other mechanism. doesn't really work. And almost all those models seem like they had to migrate to managed services to maintain their value. So I'm not only going to do your work, I'm going to improve what you were doing on an ongoing basis. And maybe that's where the next logical step is as a service, where I'm just over top of that making it easier for you to consume it. So it's not even like you telling me what you need. I'm gonna pre-package it so you can just buy what's off the shelf. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that does resonate. I mean, I think there will always be some outsourced services that make sense, right? The true menial things that you just don't want to invest resources in to get done. But you're right. From a business or IT standpoint, when we talk about that, the managed service has to come with some type of plus, right? There has to be something that's going to benefit us, more than just us doing it ourselves. And that's why we go out and seek those type of services. Right.
And I think it's made it sometimes difficult to shop for and buy, because it's as opposed to the as a service model, which is kind of built for speed as far as a consumption model. Hey, I can just, and this is, of course, it's the best and worst part about it is that departments are signing up for their own as a service things and putting it on a P card and calling it a day, whether or not they integrate well or not, because it's just already there for them to consume and they can start working tomorrow. So it's great, but it's also it's harder. It's easier to buy that than a managed service, but a managed service sometimes is a more appropriate thing. And still getting good at figuring out which is the right model is going to be part of the work we still have to do.
Right.
I just gave you nothing else to say except for right. Good, that's fine. So,
I mean, there is some other things. I mean, we can for sure as a service. There are other things we can definitely talk about here. The one thing is if you're doing anything as a service, the easier it is to consume, the more sprawl you may have, the more waste you may have. I mean, there has to be management around this, and different type controls than what you've had before, because your costs can get way out of whack real fast when things are so much easier to start up and tear down. But you got to remember, you got to tear them down. You got to be doing things for the right reason. Does someone need 30 servers to do a test? I don't know. It seems like that would be excessive. But you got to look at those things to make sure that you can control your costs, or they're going to get out of hand really fast, much faster than if you had it on site.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I think we've got a slide in here a little later that's really part of when VMware talks about their part in their sponsor today. So I'll give them a shout out. But we talk about their place in digital transformation. It's really giving you that data so you can make those kinds of decisions in a more fluid way of spinning up and spinning down and finding the right resources and trying to find efficiency. So you're not spending your time doing, you're spending your time deciding. And because I mean, the as a service stuff, all those things scale almost too linearly. And ultimately, if you're going to be doing a lot of something, eventually you want to maybe bring some of it in house. But you want to start there because it takes too much time and energy to start it up. And I guess, Chad, I know you and I talked about this because the knowledge base around understanding how to make those management decisions, those controls in place, that's what seems like it's most missing here.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree to a certain extent. It's I think a lot of what starts to drive the everything as a service component is when organizations are attempting to take the infrastructure and managed services layer and divorce them from the application layer. The right. assumption being the managed services and infrastructure becomes the prerequisite platform that their applications have to run on, but the organization is really focusing on those applications and those outcomes and not turning the crank around the managed services in the infrastructure. So right. yes, there absolutely has to be controls there because as Bob said, the easier it is to consume, the faster it can get out of control. But a proper controls and management around them, which really starts at visibility, and that's where many organizations historically have been challenged, is a 360 view of actually what their assets are.
Right, assets, and certainly the processes that go around them. So I know we put together this little picture for something else, but this is I think it's a pretty good view of what the device lifecycle looks like or can look like when you're talking about endpoints in the organization. Because you're going to buy endpoints. You're going to consume what endpoints do, and you're going to be a lot of different people that are going to be engaged in that process, and then they're going to have gaps, and internal IT and the vendor management has to kind of fill those gaps. And I think when people start to look at make the decisions around these things, around cost and around complexity and around where to invest the rest of the time, it's always hard to see exactly what is going into all of these processes. So, when we show this to someone, it's like, well, this is what's going on with you buying your laptops and your iPhones. They're like, oh, yeah, that's right. I hadn't really thought about it, and now now it makes sense that I need to fix that because that looks pretty broken, but colorful. Bob, does this look like something that you recognize?
Yeah, I think I've seen this chart quite a few times and lived it more than that. So
fair enough. So let's talk some more about Nationwide. So you guys, I know, have gone through a lot of changes over 93 years, but there was a most recent big change where you were really looking at becoming a mobile-first company. And I know I think you engaged Vox Consulting back in 2013 as part of that process. What kind of initiated that? So I know there are still companies that we face on a regular basis that are still getting into this notion of not talking about mobile first, they're talking about digital transformation, but they're still talking about that next big step into taking them seriously as a digital company.
Yes.
What started it?
Yeah, so what started it is that we were doing portfolio planning, right? Looking at our projects across the enterprise and saying, and categorizing and doing the normal things you would do when you look at, your whole project portfolio. And what we noticed is there were so many things that were classified as mobile, that we had pockets of mobile development and mobile projects and efforts all over the enterprise. And once we started to add things up, it was quite a bit of money, time, and resources that were dedicated to just mobile. But we were treating it as the same as everything else. We weren't really looking at it from a strategic standpoint. We were treating it more like an expense, right? And that's a different mindset, treating it something as an expense or treating it as something, an aspiration, a goal, a strategic initiative. So
an expense against what the business is already doing, or an expense against what the outcomes are going to be? Because that's probably the difference, right? Are we seeing this as something that's going to have a strategic outcome, and therefore it's an investment, versus just it's going to be a cost of doing business?
Exactly. Is it just a cost of doing business, or is it an investment? And so really what happened is we put together a lot of information, and they actually went to the board, and they said, hey, we can handle this in one of three ways. We can do it. Do you want us to look at this as do we want to look at mobile as an expense? Do we want to look at mobile as an investment? Or do we want to look at it as mobile first? Right? And again, three distinct differences there. And what they came back with is, definitely we want to be mobile as an investment, but we want to aspirational get to mobile first. And we're still in that journey, but everything now that we look at, any new solution or anything that we're looking at, we do look at the mobile component with it too, right? Whether it's a new service that we're getting, a cost service that we're purchasing, what are the mobile components to that? There has to be some mobile component. We want those solutions to touch, the tips of our business, and so that is the change, that we definitely made.
And Bob, let's define mobile from your perspective now, because I know when I talk to folks, and we're preparing this next research project around digital transformation. A lot of what I'm hearing is that, hey, the mobile world is now starting to consume the rest of the endpoint world, and the way we were handling apps and deployments in the mobile world is now seeming like the right way to think about things for desktop, laptops, employee choice and things like that. So are you seeing it that way too? Has mobile started to merge into meaning more than it used to?
Right, and that is a great point, and I do see that, and I do feel that, and I do feel the convergence of traditional desktops, virtual desktops, web services, and mobile all as one. Right, that is where everything is going, and us as IT professionals, it changes the conversation. It changes the way that we'll be managing things in the future, because we have a desktop team, we have a virtual team, we have a mobile team, and we work great together. But in the future, our tools and everything will be shared together, right? We'll present services to people that they can consume no matter what platform they're on. That's an entirely different way at looking at the end user computing space, right?
Yeah, well, that's once again shouting out to our sponsor VMware. I mean, their mantra that I've heard Sanjay say about 13 billion times. Any app on any device anywhere. We used to make jokes about something like that. We used to call 4A, any 5 years ago. But now it seems completely now. You could really do it right now. You could oh, you want to add this thing? No problem. I got identity figured out. I got deployment figured out. You can turn it on and off real easy. But I guess so. That's one of those things too. It seems it's felt to me like you've gotten to this very agile way of looking at how you're procuring technologies and services, how you design projects, how you design working teams. I mean, is agile a well understood thing within Nationwide, or does it just become part of the culture that you don't even know if you're doing it?
I think it's more part of the culture. Maybe not for every area of Nationwide, but it's definitely part of the culture, right? Okay. And people look more to do it in those things. You don't have to traditionally. In the past, I should say, not traditionally. In the past, we did things like everyone else. We had these monolithic projects that took, months and months, years and years, to get something done. And it just wasn't the optimal way to do it. So being more agile and working in sprints and working to get a minimum viable product out first, then build on that with more features and functions. That's much better for our end users and for our developers. Everyone feels a sense of accomplishment. You work on a project for a year and don't deliver anything yet. That's not a good feeling. But if about every 90 days you're completing something and people are getting value out of it, that makes you feel good.
Well, and Chad, it really speaks to the communications part of getting transformation done. Everyone wants to feel like they're engaged in it, and besides that, it gives you a way to include their feedback on an ongoing basis. So you really are being responsive.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's you have to have the full circle of stakeholders engaged, and like Bob was talking about earlier, these historically distinct teams, the silos are coming down. And they're coming down because these projects are moving faster and the demands are more dynamic on them. I mean, this idea of being able to move from device to device and continue to work, I mean, that's rapidly coming. Or let me step it back. It's not coming. It's here. Whether it's the virtual desktop, Microsoft's third attempt at mobility, from their perspective, they may be getting it right this time, in that their Office suite is functional regardless of platform, and they're doing interesting things with it.
I got to tell you, I have so many days now where I'm in, whether it's an Excel document or it's a Google Doc, and I'm on 5 different devices, and I just keep doing the work. I don't even think about it anymore, and I know not everybody is there yet, but I when you're forced to, when you're mobile all the time, the fact you can do it and then stop thinking about it, that seems hugely powerful to me. So, Bob, let's talk about some of these key topics here. So, when we talked before, you gave me a couple of bullet points here that you thought were really keys to what you've gotten to here. And I think we've already touched on one, that minimum viable product. This notion that you're going to get something out so people can look at it and respond to it right away, and then iterate on that. That just works, and it works and it works across the business. It isn't just a technology concern.
Yeah, I mean, it works, but I tell you what, you got to be patient with that, right? And you have to set that up in the right way. So you have to make sure that your customers, your associates, the people who are going to use your services, understand that this isn't the end product. This doesn't have everything in it. We're going to build on top of this and make things better, but we're going to do it by the second bullet point here. We're going to do it by getting feedback. And, and how do you get that feedback? And what's the expectation of you using, these solutions? Many times when we put our minimum viable product out there, it is to a pilot group with the expectations that you're going to give us some feedback so we can make things better. We're experts at making things work in IT. We're not experts at making it work how you want to have it work. And, as an end user, and until you can get that feedback, you never know if you're really hitting the mark or not. So that's definitely something that we've, really been focused on there. And then that kind of leads us, yeah.
Well, the one thing I want to say with that is that I've heard from a number of mobile thought leaders that the one thing that they were able to teach the organization, the business, that, from Agile, that really made a difference for everybody was this notion of being able to describe their feedback in terms of user stories, and be able to say, as somebody, I want to be able to accomplish this thing so that this outcome. And so, which is, the kind of the framework for beginning a sprint, right? But being able to say it in a way that the technology folks can understand it, and it is explicit in its own test. Like, hey, now I know exactly what, checking the box that it actually works will look like, because you've told me, as this kind of user, I want to be able to do this thing and have this outcome. And now, that has become, so I think it's a brilliant part of Agile that works really anywhere across the business. So, but yeah, so towards that end, learning to communicate, and those are your three keys down there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we, it took us a long time to figure that out, actually. But we know now that we have to have an educational program with no matter what we're rolling out for people. We have to do marketing. I mean, I know people should be using our services and solutions from an IT standpoint, but if you're not filling a need that they have, if they still have that gap, our end users are going to find another way to do it. But if they don't know we have these solutions, they're never going to use them. So you got to do the marketing. And then communication isn't just general communication. It also includes feedback and everything else. Just making sure that the information is available to people out there so they can consume. Whether it's in webinars or we have a broadcast we can do internally. We have our own radio show. So
that's great. Well, I think because too, I found it's very challenging. I'm helping an app company right now, and I know one of the things we face is trying to create the situation so that users can ask the questions that they wanted to ask. I think what we call it is when you go to the doctor, it's the doorknob question. You're there for a reason to see the doctor, but you're going to ask that other question. Oh, by the way, doc, while you're here, and so much of just getting to better usability tends to be in that moment, oh, you know what, while we're talking, let's do this. So creating more of those moments and making more and more comfortable people to ask those questions so they can get better at using the product and using it deeper. And then figuring out who's not using it deep enough. All of those things are just iterative ways to work on both the process and the communications to get to a feeling that we're all in this together and that we're all making progress. All right. So pain points are not the story. What does that mean, Bob?
So, I guess I should say pain points are not all of the story. So many times when you're getting that feedback, you really have to understand the intent of what they're saying, because they're reacting. Many times when you're getting feedback, they're reacting to something that they just don't like. But the real thing is they just may not understand it. That's where the education comes in. They may not know that you have a solution for that. That's where the marketing comes in. They may not know where to get information about it. That's where the general communication comes. So you really got to look at it and understand why they're upset about a particular thing and the intent around it, not just what they're telling you. And that's a big, big difference.
And I get the sense that this, because it's a bi-directional communications channels, the channels that you've created here, that when the organization goes out and does something that, they take on an as a service of some sort they didn't tell you about, and it's time to start figuring it out, or they want to consume something that you don't offer yet, is that an easier conversation now? Is it do you have a way of handling that is non-confrontational for everyone?
Yeah, we absolutely do with the processes that we've put in place, and and really focusing on communicating up front, verifying, recheck, the whole thing, and I think we've greatly improved that feedback loop all the way. So
fantastic. All right, well, and certainly if you've got questions, let us know here. We'd love to. Bob's a great wealth of knowledge, and we'd love to share him. And I'll give a shout out to Vox's consulting team here. I know, Bob, as part of this process, you consumed both the maturity assessment and the blueprint at one point. And I know what I said about these in the past is these are both valuable from the standpoint of what you'll learn about the organization in it, but as communications tools as well. I mean, you're communicating with all the right stakeholders while you're building them. And then once you have the asset, it becomes a flag on the hill that everyone can point to and say, yeah, that's what we're about. Is that a good sum up of that relationship?
Oh, I absolutely agree with that 100%. Yes. Yeah. And, and as you mentioned, we did it back in 2013 and we're doing it again, right? We're back for another time. And it's really funny going through it the second time, we got a little bit more experience in how to do this, but the team we're working with from Vox is just, just unbelievable. They bring a wealth of knowledge from so many different customers that they can come, and talk to us. And what we're finding out is, we're doing really good. But I had to remind them a couple of times that you guys kind of helped us get there. Right?
Well,
it may have taken us a while to do it, but we took the guidance that you gave us and we've been putting it into practice.
Well, and I think that's and it's so great when that can be symbiotic like that, because sometimes it's really hard. I know I've heard many stories where the guidance was given and it was really hard for it to be followed, and there weren't the changes, and you come back 3 or 4 years later and nothing's really changed. But I know a lot's changed at Nationwide, and I think that's great stuff. So certainly if you want more information about that, you can ask us afterwards. So let's get into this, what to get as a service. So with all that in mind, so we've got this sense of what this transition is going to look like. And when we asked mobile thought leaders last year, this is part of that research study that I pitched at the top of the presentation. What we're finding out is a lot of what's going on in mobile projects and digital transformation projects are being initiated outside of IT, because those are the folks that have to get things done. IT has not been able to be a catalyst or a driver of success in new initiatives like this. And with as a service, everyone's finding, look at that, 50% on above on almost all those folks, where they just go out there, get their own mobile project started. They don't need to talk to IT. And I think it starts to speak to this new relationship between IT and the business, and this new way of having IT play a role in helping to choose and integrate and offering the tools to make that stuff work better, and making things more fluid. Does that resonate with you, Chad? I mean, are you? I know as you talk to folks, are people starting to hear that, or is that a terrifying notion at this point still?
I think it's a little bit of both. I absolutely agree with the comment that the digital workplace is not based on rules, and that's where some of the more innovative organizations are. Once they realize that the analytics is there to be able to start managing by exception instead of building these tight rule-bound processes that govern end-to-end, it's actually cathartic because, as Bob had said earlier, it allows people to start working on the things they really want to be working on, not, as you had said a couple of times, turning the crank, but it's scary to get there. It's kind of, it's like your first time on the playground hanging on the monkey bars, and you got to let go of one to go to the next. That's a big first step.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I think that's really it. I mean, I think we're starting to, what I recognize is that most people are able to see the benefit of this new future, the one that Nationwide's already in, where if I build the infrastructure and the culture around, when I talk about infrastructure, not just like IT infrastructure, but actually the governance infrastructure and the rules infrastructure to enable us to be more fluid, to let more people start and create more things. That we're going to get to this place where more of the work I'm doing is more valuable, and we're better and better at making decisions on what to purchase and what not to purchase. This is a September 2017, and Gartner tends to be a little bit ahead, so we're not even a year out from their little picture here. But that insight, I think, is really the key, because with managed services we had expertise, but with as a service, I think what it's feeling to me is we're getting better and better data and insights back off of those environments to go do things. So here's some rules that I put together, and you guys can poke fun at these, because these are me accumulating my own conversations and data. So the markers of a good as a service offering is, first of all, it's about, everyone asks about cost. They want to save money. So when you're in a position where you need some risk reduction and you need more agility, it's as a service can be a great thing, and part of what you want to figure out whether it's a good deal or not is you really got to look at that fully loaded cost. And as I showed that picture earlier, it's sometimes a hard thing to see for people across everything. And I know this is one of your favorite conversations too, Chad, is like what's the true loaded cost of these things and what all goes into everything, when you're talking about the full life cycle of something.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so many of these things are fragmented and siloed that people don't have a good sense of what the cost to serve, and so many times the discussions around these various points, and this is a bit of a challenging way to describe it, but in the lack of data points, it becomes an emotional conversation. It's about how people feel, and that's a dangerous place to end up in, because you can't measure and manage when it is a few.
And Bob, so one of the points we have here is bring it back once the risk is gone. And I think it's for all of these things. Going as a service or going as a managed service, then bringing it back. I know. Like Vox has had some very big clients that when they're developing things use Vox Mobile to do the development and help through the risky times, and then took it back in house when everything was just hunky dory, and they had it pretty smooth. Do you feel like you're pretty good at figuring that out at this point at Nationwide, or is that still something to be developed?
I think we're pretty good at that, but that has to be done in partnership with your service provider too, right? And some knowledge, of how do others do this? How is it done? How does it work the best? And knowing, when to pull that trigger, though, I think that's still more of an art at times than a science. So.
I have, yeah, of course. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions in that sort of thing, and I think it's for me, it's just the thing I see that's lacking sometimes is getting into making it a process to look at things and say, does this still serve as its original purpose, as opposed to waiting for the CFO to change out, having that CFO come in and say, what the heck are we paying all these people for all this stuff for? What do they do for us? And having to re-rationalize it. Why isn't the rationalization right next to that line item in the budget? Right. Because because it's important. It's the why is important. So scale, I think this is an easy one. I know Bob, you've talked about this as well. It's like, when you're just getting something started off, there's no way you can be efficient at it, no way you can be good at it. Same thing with expertise and complexity as drivers here. So those are great markers for figuring out, hey, I'm going to go buy this as a service for a while, have somebody else be good enough at it while I go figure it out, and then figure out which parts I might want to have in-house or whether I care enough. It sounds like at this point, how would you do that internally? Do you have like one person kind of managing a process or a project that it's like, oh, we're going to go buy this as a service, then we're going to look at it? Is like someone in charge of that, or does that have to be a group effort?
No, it really has to be a group effort. It involves people from many different parts of our business, depending on what the service is. But what we've tried to do is to put together, we don't start this from scratch every time. We kind of have a template that we go by, and make sure that we ask the questions, and we keep adding to that template to make sure that we're asking the right questions to get to the right scale numbers, right? What does it really take to do this when we're looking at another service, no matter what that service may be? There are particular things with each one that you have to definitely look at. It isn't just all about servers, memory, and, things like that. It could be many other factors that you have to look at.
Yeah, well, and did you actually get to numbers? I mean, to Chad's point, if you don't have hard data points, you end up with feelings.
Yeah, and what we try to do is to quantify everything with based on what we're currently doing and what we can assume we're doing. But any assumptions that are made, we detail out exactly how we're making that assumption and
right.
in the points that we're using to get to the conclusion. So
yeah,
it's not perfect, but you got to
right.
practice this to get better, right?
Absolutely. And if you want, I've also got on my LinkedIn feed. You can get my special reverse income statement template that does exactly that for that exact reason. You got to capture those assumptions. Expertise and complexity, this kind of go are either sides of the same coin there, Chad. But I know this has been a tough one for managed services and as a service providers to kind of sort out, because the drive to make something that is really complex, easy to consume, without making it too complex to understand how to buy it. I know that's something that you face quite a bit. But when it feels like it's hard or when it's complex, that's a good time to go out and see if you can get it as a service, at least to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes back to, the slide that you showed where what are the departments or groups that are initiating these projects. And, we're seeing organizations in this next wave of mobility where the scale is unprecedented from what they've done historically. And you can see it across so many different sectors where they have a clear outcome or a business driver that they're trying to get to, but the scale outstrips what they've done historically, and in some cases there may not be a relevant what appears having place. I mean, the expertise one, it's always easy to use Amazon as an example, but I don't think it's nearly as relevant. I mean, a story I shared with you the other day, I was going through the Minneapolis airport, and I'm going from concourse to concourse, and I passed your typical airport bar restaurant, and it probably had a good 100+ seats in there, tables and bar, and they had 2 employees, but every single seat had an iPad. And so
that's right.
So the business drivers are clear in what they're trying to achieve, but you're talking about a level of scale and management and process that just was never there for that organization before. And the alpha or pilot stage is absolutely manageable. It's when you flip the switch to go to that scale that fast you can either choose to ramp all that up internally, but you're probably not going to have the speed to the market that you need.
I know we have plenty of stories we can tell about people getting that wrong. Oh, I had a little thing there. Okay, so let's move on to the good news. See, I had a little thing I forgot all about. So one of the things I definitely want to once again shout out to VMware is that I like so much their way they're looking at all of this from an infrastructure perspective and how changing the way, because so much of our time and energy gets put into infrastructure management, and managing the infrastructure does not actually get you to innovation. That's certainly been a Vox Mobile watchword, and the VMware tools are so good at giving you more and more ways of integrating and automating across multiple things. And so let's go on to into the what's next thing for us here. So as we were saying, I think early on here, Bob, is that there is always something more to do here, and increasingly, I think what most people are saying, you see this is like from a Gartner 2012 article, but we can still see this, we're getting to this place where we're getting past predictive and into this prescriptive world where being able to have the right data coming off these digital systems, which include the infrastructure automation that, maybe you've got your VMware, vSphere kind of stuff, all the way to the looking at the use cases of the apps and how they're being consumed. That all the data together, that's a lot of rich data, and there's a lot of great rich insights, but that's a different skill set that someone's got to go out and figure out how to get some insights out of.
Boy, you're sure right there. And what's funny is many times this information is unrealized expectations, right, for our business partners. They don't know how valuable the data is on the data, the analytics is on the data, right, or the service. And once we're able to do that, it does take a completely different skill set to be able to take that raw data and turn it into a dashboard or reports or something that adds even more business value than what they thought.
I couldn't agree.
You go ahead.
Sorry, Jim. I was going to jump in. I couldn't agree more with Bob. And if we roll back to the very fragmented slide you had on how these are traditionally procured and the gaps, in that type of scenario, you have to collect so many independent data sets and then harmonize those to even get them into something that you can have the skill set to interpret. And that's actually where everything as a service gets really interesting, because everything as a service can throw all those data feeds off back to you in a dashboard format.
Right.
And then you really can get into the predictive and the prescriptive. I mean, I laugh when you put that slide up there because I have an absolute passion that sits around that one, because when, as I said, once you start to get to everything as a service, then instead of having to go to all those fragmented areas and having to get into that turning the crank process of the data warehousing and the data normalization just to get it to a dashboard, you can bypass all that.
Well, that's exactly right. And Chad, I know I wanted to kind of present some of these concepts here because I think there is so much to go do that looks so different from what we were doing, a few years ago. But there's all these places where decisions have to be made where they can be automated and then approved, and this untangling of business process so that it can be digitized. But just within the idea that I know this is another thing that VMware's layered on top of their world most recently is this what Gartner's calling the UEM analytics, is that this notion of being able to bring these data sets together and starting to provide new analytics around it. And we're just beginning to get to the place where we understand what questions to ask in all of this. And that in of itself is something that people have to go figure out. Now that I have all the data, what questions do I go asking against it? And I know you've prepared some very interesting data for people, Chad, around what they're looking like from their procurement and usage perspective. But I wanted to get all the way to this one. This is something that Harjo shared with me on a recent webinar. This notion that this client of his, once they had all this data, this really rich data brought together from all these different places, they were able to rationalize how much more valuable it was to give every one of their employees tablets with apps on it they can control through Workspace ONE, as opposed to their traditional laptops. And they were able to rationalize that against all the costs. And they're able to make it better every day by looking at when they log on and when they're asked to authenticate, and so that every part of the experience can be tweaked every day to within within moments, so that if it got something that happens thousands of times every day across thousands of employees, you're talking about real value, but you couldn't get there until you had all the data together.
Yeah, that's where historically, what I'll call Enterprise Mobility 1.0, that one of the challenges with deploying all these smart devices and tablets to all these people across the organization was it was an emotional feeling that people were becoming more productive, but you never had the data points pulled together throughout the entire life cycle to actually be able to quantify that.
Right. Yeah, it's easy to say, well, let's replace this paper form with an app. Duh. Yes, that'll work great. But it's the 5,000 projects beyond that, and in prioritizing those projects and figuring out which ones to work on first and to get what resources to give them. Right, Bob? That's the hard part.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely the hard part. And, another thing, we didn't really have these tools available to give us this type of data or insights until, really recently. So, and we shared with Harjo, the same thing about how we're doing this. And now it's a different conversation we're having with our executives, because we do have the data to show, how people are using our solutions.
Well, and I think it's right for people to be suspicious of these things, because we certainly, anyone over 40 has lived through the world of worthless ERP systems. But I think, I think, Chad, you've got that. I'm going to use that in absence of hard data, you've got feelings, and I think that's what it's very hard to get to the right answers when that's the case. But we're there now, and that's the really exciting thing, is we do have really, from the top to the bottom, we've got data points that can give us whatever we need to start figuring out how to optimize how we do things, and that's where the real valuable time gets spent. And that's what we're all going to be doing once we take all the things that don't add a lot of value and start buying them as a service. Is that right, Bob?
Yeah.
Okay. Chad, is that what we've decided today?
Yeah, I think it hits the nail on the head, without a doubt.
All right. Well, gentlemen, we're right at 2:00, and that's the time we promised people we'd take away from the day, 1 hour of their lives. Hopefully, it was valuable for everybody. I will give a shout out to the voxmobile.com/simple. I know we didn't get a chance to talk about much, Chad, but you've got a great as a service offering that actually is everything on top of the devices that people actually use in the enterprise on a regular basis. So that's got to be pretty exciting for you.
It absolutely is. I mean, it's the culmination of all these things that we've been working towards and talking about for the last couple of years, but now truly turning mobility into an as-a-service utility that can be tapped into.
That's brilliant. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Bob, always a pleasure to speak with you, sir.
Yes, thanks. This has been fun, and hopefully it was informative for everyone.
Great. And Chad, once again, thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to having you on again soon.
Absolutely. I'll work on the complexion in my photo that you had.
Right, fair enough. All right, well, thanks, everybody. Once again, this event's been recorded, so you should be able to get access to it, spread around as much as you'd like. The deck is available for download. I went through some of these slides pretty quickly, but there's some good stuff in there. And thanks to our guests and to the mobile thought leaders. We'll look to hear from you and see you again real soon. Bye now.